The Australia-New Zealand area certainly punches well above its weight in biometrics. And I want to give you a couple of examples, perhaps 3 or 4 examples of why I believe that's true. First of all, I want to talk about the Biometrics Institute just in general. It came to me, it's kind of a shock to hear that Aaron was stepping down from the board of directors. I had no idea this was going to happen. So much has happened under Aaron's tutelage, and certainly we have to credit Isabel as well. Biometrics Institute started as a little tiny group. I remember speaking the first time about 12 years ago in Redfern to the group, and there may have been, we were pretty happy. We had maybe 30 people there, or 25 or something. It's now an international organization, meetings being held in Washington, D.C., meetings being held in the UK. In fact, I was just at last month, the big UK meeting, very, very well attended. I don't even remember how many hundreds of people were there. Isabel, how many hundreds of people were?
230, I think.
230.
Yeah.
That sounds like an underestimate if you count all the vendors and everyone else.
Yeah, that's
yeah,
right.
I'm sure it was much, much more than that. 230 delegates, but with all the vendors and everything.
1,200
at a meeting in London. It wasn't just any place in London. It was the Queen Elizabeth II Centre, which is really the primary place, in my opinion, in Westminster, right across the street from Parliament and Westminster Abbey. The point I'm trying to make is that Biometrics Institute started out as a little Redfern, Sydney, Australia group, and has ended up as the worldwide leader in this area. And this was not the first time that anyone thought of the idea of a biometrics industry group. The very first biometrics industry group I can remember was formulated about 1986. They had 2 meetings in New Mexico, and then the group kind of went away. I doubt if there's anybody here today that would remember the Commercial Biometric Developers Consortium. That lasted for about 3 years in the late 80s. I'm not going to mention the rest of the groups that came and went. What's interesting to me is that for about the last 13, 14 years, the Biometric Institute has not only flourished, it's become an international institute. One example of my point that Australia is punching above its weight in this area. Australia certainly is far from being the largest country in the world, having only about 23 million people. You add in the New Zealanders for another 5 million. You really don't have a significant amount of the world's population, and yet this group has put together the biggest and most successful biometrics consortium-like group in the world. The second thing I want to point out is SmartGate. I'm obviously very biased because I've been working for Immigration and Border Protection on SmartGate for since about 2000 and, well, I guess formally working since about 2001, but I heard about it in 1999. Fiona Frazier, do you all remember Fiona from Immigration, came out to California to talk to me in 1999. She said, we're going to do a border crossing system using facial recognition. That doesn't sound shocking today. In 1999, that was ridiculous. That makes no sense, Fiona. This is a really, really bad idea. Can you explain to me why you want to do this? And it was not a matter of security at all, and you have to keep in mind that ICAO, International Civil Aviation Organization, had not yet, in fact was 4 years away from declaring that facial images would be the universal biometric recognizer on machine-readable travel documents. ICAO hadn't made that decision at all. And we were talking very strongly about using fingerprints. We had previously used hand geometry in a couple of successful projects for border crossing. We'd never used face. Face was very, very fragile. Face could not put up with even minor changes in pose angle or orientation. And here we had the Australians suggesting that we use facial recognition for border crossing. Hey, it's not going to work. And the reason it's not going to work is the lighting, the fragility, the fact that people aren't used to this at all, and you have no international backing, you're just making this up. Why do you need to do this? And believe it or not, the reason was not security. The reason was passenger convenience and cost benefit. She said, we're very afraid of these 380 planes that are going to be flying in with 500 or 600 passengers. We do not have the space in our airports to allow for rapid processing of these people in even an hour. We cannot afford to build up the capacity, the physical size of our airports. We've got to introduce automation. And the way we want to do it in Australia is facial recognition. And I said, well, how are you going to put up with these problems of pose angle and illumination? And indeed they did. What they did is they mounted 5 cameras on a box. Do you remember this? so that they could get images from up, down, and both sides, because the software could not accommodate even 5 or 7 degree changes in pitch or yaw angle. And secondly, they, or we then, by then I was involved, went to the airport and was very, very careful to modify the lighting. Even, and you may remember this in the Sydney application, painting the wall next to the smart gate a darker color so there wouldn't be any reflection to give an uneven illumination across the face, which would have caused the collapse of these systems. And so we heard from Paul Cross today how this system had come from impossible in 1999, and I was one of the naysayers, to the point now where, how many people did he say were processed? That was the slide I asked about. I don't remember. I think the number, if you inferred it from the slide, was on the order of 8 million or something processed with SmartGate last year. Absolutely amazing, and Australia was out in front of everybody, including ICAO, in deciding that facial recognition would be used. Australia won here. ICAO not only became convinced facial recognition could happen, they made that the international standard, and Australia was already up and running before the international standard was in place. So that's the number 2 way in which Australia is punching above its weight. The number 3 way, we heard, I guess it was Andrew's talk, the hub and spoke talk. This hub and spoke for facial recognition is really, really interesting. Some mention was made of the FBI doing something similar. Not true. The FBI is building facial recognition into the new next generation ID system, but it's not the hub and spoke concept, because it will not have access to any facial images not already stored directly in the FBI. And those images are ones that come in with regard to federal arrests and similar types of things. This system, the FBI system, will not have access, for instance, to driver's licensing images and to images from local arrests. And the way I'm understanding hub and spoke, the way it's proposed here by your Department of Justice, is that it will have a much greater reach to other forms of database, far beyond anything that the US is even contemplating doing. So this hub and spoke system, I haven't seen it yet. I don't know enough about it. I have to find out more. I have to see it in action. But it strikes me as another first here, for which there is no competition any place in the world. A place in which, again, the Australian government is stepping out and saying, we think we can do this. There's no model for us to look at, but we think nonetheless that it's within our capabilities to do. The other thing I wanted to point out in the talks that I heard today was the general maturity. I made a whole bunch of notes. I'm not going to read them, I don't think. A whole bunch of individual statements I heard by people during the course of the day that struck me as very thoughtful and mature. Let me contrast what I heard today against so much of what I hear in the United States. And again, I'm a US citizen, I work for the US government. I'm very proud of all of what we do. I just sometimes think that in the United States we get a little technocentric. We go to a conference and we say, what is the future of biometrics? And we say, bigger sensors, larger lenses, faster processors, more connections. I didn't hear a lot of that today. I don't think that's correct. I don't think the future of biometrics is in more technology, bigger algorithms. That's all fine. You know, we'll go there. We'll get faster computers. We'll get nicer algorithms. And that's not where we put our money, and that's not where we put our focus, and that's not what I heard today. What I heard today is human factors, and human factors. In fact, I do remember one thing in particular. The Department of Taxation, the DTO, talked. Do you remember this? Today I thought, well, that's interesting. They inserted a step into the process. Instead of saying, hello, Bob, how are you doing? They said, who are we speaking with? Already knowing who they were speaking with, but considering a human factor to avoid the technology appearing to be creepy. And let me stop incidentally and say, there's a wonderful academic paper online you should download. It's called The Theory of Creepy, 2013. The author is, the first initial is O. I don't know the full name. The last name is Tene, T-E-N-E. It's available online from a number of sources, I think absolutely free. The Theory of Creepy. There's now an academic theory of creepy. And the theory of creepy, anytime our social expectations get out of line with our technology, we think that's creepy. And so what we heard today from the Department of Taxation was To avoid creepy, where, ooh, how did he know my name, right? We inserted this extra step. It wasn't necessary, but it makes people feel more comfortable. And the fact that we even thought to do that strikes me as a very mature thing to do. I would like to think that some of the US agencies would think the same way. I don't believe they always do. They say, what do we really need? And the consumer is going to take what we give them. Thank you very much. I'm so glad to hear here in Australia you are considering issues of human factors, even down to the point of avoiding a semblance of creepy. So if Australia and New Zealand are punching above their weight, why? I don't know. I can't give you a sociological answer to what that might be, but I think one reason certainly is a willingness to take risk. And again, pointing back to SmartGate, SmartGate was so risky. And it's not obvious now because it works, but at that time, I was saying, I don't think you should do this. This is not how I would be spending government money if it was my government and my money. Facial recognition is very fragile. It's pose and illumination and facial expression sensitive. I don't think you can get there from here, right? But the willingness of Australian Customs to take risk was what got us from there to here. And secondly, some enthusiasm when the going gets tough. You know, the idea that, well, we're not going to pull our money on this just because we ran into some problems. We ran into a lot of problems in SmartGate. I'm not going to relive the rollout of the second version of SmartGate in Brisbane. Well, maybe I will. You know, we were supposed to roll out, I think, in a matter of 6 or 8 weeks. It took a full 12 months. The hoarding was up around the airport for 12 months. That took, bless the airport management of Brisbane, that they didn't throw customs out of there for taking so doggone long. I don't know how much over budget it ran because I wasn't responsible for that. But the fact that everybody hung in on SmartGate, including the Brisbane airport, including Australian Customs, was so essential and so amazing, and I'm not sure it would have happened in the United States, but the fact that it happened here in Australia speaks a great deal to the Australian tenacity. And so I think at least those two reasons contribute to the punch that we see Australia delivering, that is the willingness to take risk. And then risk means you might not work, it might not work like you think, exactly. And the willingness to hang in when things don't work like you think, even when you get a year behind schedule in a very public place like the Brisbane airport. All right, a couple of notes that occurred to me on, well, what's next? What happens now? This whole business of mobile biometrics is really, really interesting. Because for years we said the last thing you want to do is to have your biometrics on the internet. If anyone asks you to send them your biometrics, you simply say no, and I still believe that strongly. And in fact, we remember, perhaps you remember McDonald's hamburgers 10 or 15 years ago, selling hamburgers to people on the basis of their fingerprint. The idea of giving my fingerprints to McDonald's doesn't really make much sense to me. I really, really therefore like the idea of putting biometrics on my phone where those biometric measures never leave my phone. The phone authenticates me, the user, to the phone, and then the phone can authenticate itself without sending any biometrics to whatever application wants it. I like that a lot because I don't want my fingerprints flying around on the internet any more than I want my taxation number flying around on the internet. I think those are both bad ideas, so consequently I think mobile biometrics, as we're conceiving of it and talking about it today, is like a really good thing. This is a surprise to me. I would not have anticipated all this happening 5 years ago. What's next? I think greater uptake of existing systems, and that gets back to Paul Cross's slide that I asked him about SmartGate. We've got a whole lot of biometric systems in place, and in the last 30 minutes, you've heard about a lot of opportunities. We've got to get greater uptake of the existing systems. More people, for instance, using SmartGate. More people, for instance, using biometrics in online applications. How is that going to happen? Human factors, and human factors. I know I'm running out of time, and I could go on and on with these stories. Let me just give you one, I'm sorry. Again, a US story. US Department of Defense had a requirement that 99.9% of the people could be used by this system. It was a program I worked on about 1.5 years ago. And so I said, well, now wait a minute. The requirement is that 99.9% of the people effectively use the system. It means 1 person in 1,000 is all you're going to allow not to be able to use the system. And they said, that's right. That's our current requirement. I said, all right, I'm looking at the team of people that you brought in. Where is the human factors group? Is it human? No. Jim, we're not interested in human factors. This is the Department of Defense, okay? Human factors, look. If half the people can use it, okay, that's fine. Like, wait. There's a bit of a disconnect. You tell me on one hand that 99.9% of the people have to use it successfully, but you only want about 50% of the people to use it comfortably. You don't see the direct correlation between comfort, and I mean comfort in all sense, not only physical but mental comfort, all kinds of comfort, and the performance of the system. No, they didn't see it, but I think by the end of the test program that we put into place, they understood very, very well. They were talking about a human factors issue, not technical performance. The problems weren't the algorithm. The algorithm was just great. The problem with the people did not know what to do in the presence of the system 99.9% of the time, right? You had a lot more than 1 out of 1,000 people that walk up and said, what? So the whole point is that the future is going to require greater uptake of our existing systems, and that's going to require lots and lots of research into the human factors, including avoidance of creepy. That's really important. Now, what's next? I also want to throw in forensics. We didn't talk about forensics at this meeting, and I was a little bit surprised. There's been this great convergence of biometrics and forensics in the United States over the last maybe 2 years, not much more than that. I don't want to say too much about what happened over the weekend in France because we really don't know too much about it. But I think what we will see is greater convergence of biometrics, not only with law enforcement, but forensics. Let me define forensics as activities in courts of law. So how do we get what we do here in terms of automated human recognition into courts of law? This turns out to be a real hard and serious problem. I've been involved in 2 very, very high-profile court cases in the United States in the last 2 years. It is not at all clear when we're trying to identify people using automated methods like we do in this group, how to get that testimony into a court, and whether that testimony should hold up in court, and to what extent should it hold up in court, and how should we present that testimony. That's going to be a big move right now in the U.S. There are a number of people, I think even in this room, I'm looking around, there are a number of committees that have been set up by the U.S. government recently to study various areas of forensics, including fingerprint recognition, face recognition, voice recognition. There's no committee on iris recognition. I know there are a number of Australians involved in these committees. I'm looking around, I saw a couple people earlier that were. There are, Peter back there, I think you're involved in these committees. I think the convergence of biometrics and forensics is something we're going to see in the near future. All right, so what would I have done differently at this meeting? In other words, I think I should say, gee, if I had it to organize over again, what might I have done? I think I would have included more, in hindsight, more forensics people. I would have had some linkage here with the forensic world. I like very much that we saw Emily Minter, a lawyer. I think the addition of lawyers to this group is very, very important, not only from the point of view of privacy, but from the point of view of forensics, where the word forensics means in courts of law. People from a technical background like myself don't naturally understand what has to happen in a courtroom. We don't. I mean, what has to happen in a courtroom is very, very different, requires a very, very different set of reasoning. In fact, it's not only, it's system conditioned. I'm starting to understand what has to happen in a U.S. courtroom, but U.S. courtrooms, and I suspect this is true in Australia, are state by state. And what has to happen in a Florida courtroom, as I learned, is very, very different than what has to happen in a federal courtroom. Boy, I got hammered on that a couple of years ago. I didn't realize that the state of Florida was so very, very different as to what you could and couldn't say, and what you did bring forward and what you didn't bring forward. So the point is, this idea of bringing our technologies into the courtroom is going to require a whole lot of thinking that we are not used to doing. We're going to have to require lawyers in our group. So, and finally, I think we didn't pull in as many academics, there are a few here, didn't pull in as many academics, and I do want to mention this. I had forgot to mention this in Punch Above the Weight. Probably most of you don't realize right now, but the leading academic institution with regard to speaker recognition is Queensland University. They absolutely blew everybody out of the water maybe 3 or 4 years ago with a different, very, very different approach to speaker recognition. There is an ongoing speaker recognition test program in the United States, and Queensland University has been walking away with that program for about the last 4 or 6 years. Also, I believe what we heard today about speaker recognition with MyGov and DTO is far beyond anything anyone in the rest of the world is doing. There's a little bit of forensic speaker recognition going on, for instance, in Spain and Mexico, but no civilian applications, I don't believe, to the extent that I heard today in MyGov and DTO. So I will say we could have brought in more academics because there's a whole lot of very, very advanced, high-profile, punching above the weight academic work going on here in Australia. So I would just like to conclude, finally, I know you're waiting to get out. I'd just like to conclude today by saying that I was very impressed with what I saw today. And I'm very impressed with what's going on here in Australia. Australia continues to punch above its weight, meaning continues to do far more than one would expect from a population of 23 million or 28 million or however you want to count the population of this region. I think you're to be congratulated on what you do. I think you're heading absolutely continue to head in the right direction. And I'm also very, very thankful to the Biometrics Institute for taking such a strong leadership role, and particularly thankful to all the work that Aaron has done during this period of transition and his leadership of our group. Thank you very much, all of you, and Aaron in particular.